and spit in his face, and shall answer and say, so shall it be done unto that man that will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in Israel the house of him that hath his shoe loosed. That is, he will bear that opprobrium. He will bear that name as a man who refused to obey the law and raise up a child by his dead brother's wife. Now God decreed that the childless widow of the dead man should not marry a stranger, but instead that the kinsman, the brother, should take her to be his wife. And when such a marriage took place, the firstborn son of the marriage would not be regarded as the son of his father, but would be regarded as the son of the dead man. This son would bear the name of the dead man and receive his inheritance. So you see, if this brother married this widow and raised up a family and a son with her, it would cut his own son out of his inheritance. And so sometimes they would refuse because they didn't want their own son by their other marriage to lose his inheritance. It would go to the son that he raised up through the widow. And this is what happened in the case of Ruth and Boaz. There's an interesting verse in John chapter 1 and verse 27 where it speaks of John the Baptist. And we read, he it is who's coming after me, John the Baptist speaking, is preferred before me, whose shoe latchet I am not worthy to unloose. Now, most people have taken that to mean that's an expression of John's humility. No, that's not what he meant. What John was saying is, I cannot stand in his shoes. I am not the Redeemer. I cannot stand in his shoes. I cannot redeem. I am not the Redeemer. That's what he's saying by that verse. The context makes it clear because the Jews sent priests and Levites to ask him, who art thou? And John confessed and denied not, saying, I am not the Christ. Now Ruth has been gleaning in Boaz's field, this wealthy Boaz. And she goes to glean and then goes home to Naomi. And Naomi has a question. Where hast thou gleaned today? What field did you go to glean in today, Ruth? I want to know whose field you gleaned in. And we read in chapter 2 and verse 19, and where wrougest thou? And blessed is he that did take knowledge of thee. Blessed is that man who let you glean in his field. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, the man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. And Naomi jumped up and clapped her hands. That's not in the Bible, that's just part of my sermon. But I believe that's what she did. That's what she did. Did you say the owner of the land where you gleaned the field today is Boaz? Yes, his name is Boaz. Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, verse 20, blessed be he of the Lord, who hath not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And Naomi said unto her, the man is near of kin to us, one of our next kinsmen. Naomi is saying the grace of God in his providence has led you to the field of Boaz. And of all the fields that you could have gone to, Boaz's field is the only one that can be a redeemer to us. No one else could do it except Boaz. And God led you to the field of Boaz, and you gleaned in his field, not knowing that Boaz can be our redeemer. He can redeem our property. He can redeem you. And she was overjoyed. There is a picture of the providence of God. God moving in their lives to bring about his will. And then Naomi, realizing that Ruth had found favor with Boaz, she begins to play matchmaker. And she wants to get Ruth married to Boaz. And then Boaz can be their redeemer. And so in chapter 3, she says in verse 2, "And now is not Boaz of our kindred? Is he not one of our relatives, with whose maidens thou wast? Behold, he winnoweth barley tonight in the threshing floor. Wash thyself therefore, and anoint thee." Put on some perfume. It's not in the Bible either. "Anoint thee, and put thy raiment upon thee, and get thee down to the floor." That's the threshing floor. "But make not thyself known unto the man, until he shall have done eating and drinking. And it shall be, when he lieth down, that thou shalt mark the place where he shall lie. And thou shalt go in and uncover his feet, and lay thee down, and he will tell thee what thou shalt do." Now there's nothing immodest here at all. "And she said unto her, All that thou sayest unto me, I will do." So the next morning, Ruth goes back to the field to glean, and she doesn't go home for a while. And she comes back to Naomi, and she does what Naomi told her to do. She waits till it gets dark, and everybody's gone to sleep, and Boaz is gone, laid down by the edge of the corn crib, and she slips up very quietly and lifts the blanket off of his feet. And in a little while, he got cold. He got cold feet. His feet were cold. And he woke up. And it says she went down to the floor and did according to all that her mother-in-law bade her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of corn. And she came softly and uncovered his feet and laid her down. And it came to pass at midnight, the man was afraid and turned himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. And he said, "Who art thou?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, thine handmaid. Spread therefore thy skirt over thine handmaid, for thou art a near kinsman." Now Ruth, when she was asking Boaz to spread his skirt over her, and when she called him a near kinsman, she was using a figure of speech that was tantamount in the East in those times. It was tantamount to an acceptance of a marriage proposal. And she was saying in the Eastern way of their way of saying things, "Yes, I will marry you. You are our kinsman redeemer." And actually, according to the law, Boaz didn't have any choice in the matter. The law said that if she made the proposal to him, and she did, then he was obligated to become her kinsman redeemer and to marry her. That was an obligation. He had to do it. But he was happy to do it because he had fallen in love with her. And now, that reminds us of God when he chose Israel to be his wife. In Ezekiel 16 and verse 8, when God betrothed Israel to himself. And we read in 16:8, "Now when I passed by thee and looked upon thee," now God is talking to Israel here, "behold, thy time was the time of love. And I spread my skirt over thee, and covered thy nakedness. Yea, I swear unto thee, and entered into a covenant with thee, saith the Lord God, and thou becamest mine." Those are Oriental terms of marriage proposals. Now in chapter 3 and verse 7, according to this law, Ruth was the one to take the initiative. That was her place, to take the initiative. And then it was Boaz's place to respond. And as a widow, it was incumbent upon her to let her intentions be known to the kinsman. And that's the way they did it in those days. And if the kinsman refused her proposal, she could hail him into court and bring disgrace upon him. And so in chapter 3 and verse 12, Boaz agrees. In fact, he was happy to agree. But there was an obstacle in the way. He said, "Ruth, I'm all for marrying you, and I would be glad to do it, but there's a fly in the ointment. There's an obstacle in the way. There's something standing in the way of my marrying you." And Ruth says, "Well, what could that be?" And he says in verse 11 of chapter 3, "And now, my daughter, fear not. I will do to thee all that thou requirest. For all the city of my people doth know that thou art a virtuous woman." The people had observed Ruth, and they saw that she was an upright, clean, honest young woman. He said, "Everybody knows that you're a virtuous woman. And now it is true that I am thy near kinsman." Yes, I am. I'm your near kinsman. And I am obligated to perform this rite of marrying you. Howbeit, now here's the problem. Howbeit, there is a kinsman nearer than I. There's another kinsman, another relative, and he has first place over me. And if he chooses to marry you and to redeem the land, there's nothing I can do about it because he has first choice. This is the law in Israel. And then he says to her, "Tarry this night. And it shall be in the morning that if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, well, let him do the kinsman's part. But if he will not do the part of a kinsman to thee, then I will do the part of a kinsman to thee." He said, now it all depends upon whether or not he chooses to marry you and redeem the land. So Ruth has a twofold problem. First of all, she's a Moabite. I read in Deuteronomy 23 and verse 3, "An Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter the congregation of the Lord. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever." However, there was a provision in the law of Moses that a female proselyte, that is a Gentile who had come among the people of Israel, could marry a male Israelite, and that would allow Ruth to marry Boaz. So that's the first problem's out of the way because Boaz is willing to marry her. The law shut her out as it shut us out. The 10 Commandments shut us out. But grace brought Ruth in, and it was grace that brought us in. Now the second problem was the nearer kinsman problem. Always when a legal matter was to be determined, they would go to the gate of the city. And there the elders of the city would sit through the day. They would hear complaints and cases, much like our modern courts, but it was done at the gate, at the city wall. And so he goes down to the place where they're waiting. And this nearer kinsman that has first choice comes by. And something takes place. And just before that, I want to give you something else. The second time that Ruth comes back, this is after she had uncovered his feet, Naomi has another question. When Ruth came in and shut the door, Naomi ran to her and said in verse 16 of chapter 3, "Who art thou?" Well, now, of course she knew who she was. She was her daughter-in-law. She had been living together for some time. "Who art thou?" Why did she ask that question? She was asking her this: are you Ruth the Moabitess, or are you Mrs. Boaz? That's what I want to know. What took place when you uncovered his feet? What happened? Tell me. Are you Mrs. Boaz? Verse 18, then said she, "Sit still." Don't try to help Boaz. Don't think that you need to do something. "Sit still, my daughter, until thou know how the matter will fall. For the man will not be in rest until he hath finished the thing this day." She said, "Don't you go back to the field tomorrow. You let Boaz handle it. Put it in Boaz's hands. If you go back there, you mess things up. You put it in Boaz's hands and leave it there. Because he won't rest until he has